Okay,
we should be
welcome.
good.
Yes, thank you, Summer. Welcome everyone to our special City Council meeting. Today is Tuesday, April 20th, 2021. It is 6:05 p.m. And the purpose of us convening tonight is twofold. First, we are going to receive a presentation on ranked choice voting. Thank you so much, folks, for joining us this evening on that. And second, we will be holding a workshop regarding our fiscal year end 2022 budget. So I think we did a good job in putting the ranked choice voting presentation first. And I just want to welcome the folks that are here with us. But I'm not sure if those are your real names or the names of the computer that you are borrowing. So go ahead and introduce yourselves and welcome to our City Council meeting. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start, Mayor. Thank you very much for having us here from the Utah County Elections team. It's great to be with all of you, the coolest city in Utah, probably the place outside of Provo I actually spend the most time on vacations. So I hopefully contributed a little bit to your general fund from time to time. My name is Josh Daniels. I'm the Chief Deputy Clerk Auditor for Utah County, oversee elections, finance, budget, a few other things. And I'm joined with some of my colleagues on our All-Star Elections team, our Elections Director, Roseanne Mitchell, Supervisor Carly Jarvis, and Ballot Center Director Andrew Hahn. I'll let each of them introduce themselves here. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Roseanne, and I'm the Elections Director in Utah County. I have 20 plus years of elections experience, and I hate to say it, but I really do love it. And it's fun to be a part of this, and I hope that we can shed some light on ranked choice voting for you.
Welcome, Roseanne. Thanks for joining us. That is a lot of experience and a lot of time and a lot of love for elections.
Andrew, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Oh, there's Carly. Go ahead, Carly.
Hey, lead. Oh, yep. I'm Carly. I'm the elections director. Just a second, Kay. I have been with the elections office for like 12 plus years, and yeah, I just was in Moab this past weekend, and it was pretty fun. Sorry, I'm out with my dog. There's a neighbor kid. Come on. So, yep, that's me.
Thanks for joining us, Carly, and reminding us that it is 6 p.m. and we all do have lives and children and dogs that we are neglecting by talking about ranked choice voting because of how important it is. So, thanks.
Okay. I'm Andrew Hahn. I run the Ballot Center at Utah County. So any questions you have about that, I'll be able to answer.
Thank you, Roseanne, Carly, and Andrew. And we also have joining with us Corey Holdaway, also from the Utah Ranked Choice Voting Center. Corey, did you have anything you wanted to share before we get started?
No, just thank you for the opportunity to address the council and on this issue, and we're grateful to answer any questions that you might have.
I have something to add. Corey and I went to high school together, and he probably does not remember, but Corey had red hair.
Yes. Tell me your maiden name.
That's right, Knudsen.
I'm sorry.
I know. There were only 3,000 of us, Corey.
That's embarrassing. I'm sorry, Tony.
Go get your yearbook.
Oh, I will. In fact, I'm going to pull it out right now. I know right where it's at.
This is adorable. She remembered you because of your red hair.
I had an afro too. It was like the 70s.
Corey Holdaway and Rusty Hart in their big red afros walking down the hall.
That's true. Oh,
Awesome.
I'm embarrassed.
Well, I think that's a good starting point actually for ranked choice voting, because one of the selling points, as I understand it, is that ranked choice voting brings people together. So one of the theories, though, is that rather than a campaign strategy rooted in kind of burning down your opponents because it's you and none others, you can have a little bit more collaborative campaigns where it's you and some others, and where you agree, you actually want voters to see the things that you have in common with your competitors, while it's still appropriate and useful to draw distinctions. But if you're talking to a voter and they say, well, Josh, I prefer Joel, actually. I say, you know what, that's okay. Joel's a great guy, and Joel and I agree on these 3 issues. And I sure would love to have your second choice vote if I can't be your first choice vote. And so it causes candidates to be a little bit more collaborative with how they campaign. And that's a nice feature of bringing people together. But in terms of background, I'll do a quick high level on Utah County and what we offer. And then if there's questions, I'd love to answer them. The legislature, as you know, allowed for ranked choice voting for municipalities as of 2019. Utah County was the first county to offer that. Vineyard and Payson opted to do that, and we serviced their elections in 2019. All of our systems, and frankly, the systems that basically every county in the state have, is compatible with ranked choice voting. We use the election system and service company, ES&S, out of Nebraska. They are the dominant statewide vendor for elections. Just about every county, with the exception of Salt Lake County and one other, use ES&S systems. We run a primarily vote by mail system. All voters get a ballot. Return postage is paid if that voter returns their ballot in the mail or uses a drop box and saves the postage. All ballots are paper. If you show up on election day, we're going to print you a paper ballot for your precinct, and then we're going to scan it right on the site. All paper ballots that come back to our office are scanned through optical scanners. And the ranked choice voting ballot, it's a paper ballot. It looks like a grid. You've got the names of the candidates down one column, and then you have first, second, third, fourth, fifth choice, and so on, with bubbles accordingly in the grid. And voters bubble in their choices. John's my first choice, Susan's my second choice, and so on. We experienced really 0 complications with ranked choice voting. We even logged phone calls to our office from voters and the types of questions that they had during the 2019 election. One of the topics was ranked choice voting. Were voters calling about ranked choice voting? Or were they calling about having not gotten a ballot? Or were they calling about a mail question? And we found literally less than 1% of callers were calling about ranked choice voting specifically. And so we didn't really discern that voters had any more confusion or problems with the ranked choice nature of the election. Most voters have questions about registration and timelines and returning your ballot, those kinds of things. We even were sensitive to concerns we'd heard about ranked choice voting being confusing. So we created a sample ranked choice voting ballot, and it was actually, the question was interesting. It's which national park in Utah is your favorite? One of them is obviously in your backyard. And I think that was the winner, actually, of our little sample ballot. But we took this sample ballot to retirement homes and assisted living centers here in Provo. And we did a little presentation on vote by mail generally, but not ranked choice voting specifically. And our whole point was to distribute a ranked choice voting ballot with 0 instructions, and then listen to concerns and see what problems and confusion people may have had. What we were trying to determine was, is the ranked choice voting ballot itself clear enough and intuitive enough that it undermines any confusion? And that's what we found. We had seniors, some of whom were over 100 years old, who had no question about the ranked choice nature. We could even hear some of the conversations, and they would say, well, which one do I vote for? Oh, well, Susie, you can vote for all of them. You just put them in order. oh, well, such and such is my first choice. So I'll mark that one first choice. So the point is the ballot itself is very intuitive for voters. And so this idea that ranked choice voting is inherently confusing, we just didn't find evidence for that.
Mayor, if we have questions, do you want them at the end or should we ask them as we have them?
We can ask them as we go. I was going to just share maybe a couple more items and then just go right into questions if you'd like.
Okay.
We did a little bit of research. We actually went on a fact-finding mission to California, where we went to San Francisco. The Bay Area has about 6 major counties that converge in the Bay Area. And so we hopscotched around and met 4 or 5 of these counties to see how they do elections, because we had some friends there that had worked in Salt Lake County. We knew them and we knew they were pretty innovative. So we learned a whole lot about election administration from some of our neighboring counties there. But San Francisco County actually does ranked choice voting. And one of the things that stood out to me wasn't so much ranked choice voting, it was that they spend $30 a year administering elections, $30 per voter. Our budget is like 6 or 7. So pretty phenomenal operation that goes on there. But we did learn some tips and tricks about ranked choice voting. I want to share quickly my screen. Let's see here. I'm going to hit the share screen. I don't know if the admin will need to allow me to share my screen.
You should be able to share.
Okay, awesome. All right, so this is our website here, utahcounty.vote. It'll take you right here. We have an election results tab. And in the 2019 election, we have the results from Payson and Vineyard. And I want to show you a cool little interactive chart. So in the Payson City Council election for the first seat that they had available, and they elected multiple that year, we took the results of the ranked choice voting and we put it into this interactive chart. This will be available for any city in Utah that does this. This is a free tool. And so right here in round 1, these are all the ballots and all the first choice votes for the candidates and how they tally up. Doug Welton, who was a city council member at the time, he's now actually in the state legislature. He got 1,000 votes, a little over 1,000 on the first round, but the threshold to win was 1,304. So it required going to successive rounds in the ranked choice voting process. And this chart is cool because you just click along to round 2 and it shows how the ballots were redistributed. And then round 3, you see who gets eliminated and how their votes are redistributed. And then round 4, ultimately, after eliminating these 3 candidates, then Doug wins the first seat that was available in Payson. And there's another chart for seat 2 and another chart for seat 3. And we have a similar chart for Vineyard here. So that's a really nice interactive visual tool that helps voters and the public understand how the ranked choice voting tabulation process results in a winner, round by round. But those rounds happen virtually, and we essentially do that through our software. So a couple of highlights. We have all the equipment and software necessary to administer ranked choice voting. We're not using anything significantly different than any other county. We use the ES&S system to scan ballots. We use an additional piece of software to automate this tabulation process. That piece of software has been tested at a voter system test laboratory and certified by the state lieutenant governor's office for use in conjunction with the ES&S system. We run a vote by mail process. And so the cities that are working with us, we've told them that the cost is capped at $225 a voter. That covers all the outgoing and incoming postage and all of the staff and tabulation costs. If a city like Moab were to do ranked choice voting and you were to eliminate the possibility of having a primary, then you'd only have to pay the cost of one particular election at the cost of $225 per active registered voter, before election day.
Let me just interject here if I could. In 2021, the legislature passed a piece of legislation, House Bill 75, which allows for cities outside of a jurisdiction where a county clerk doesn't feel like they have the capability to run an RCV election. They can contract with another county. So in this case, if Moab were to contact your county clerk, which I think you've done, they've said that they're not really comfortable with it. Legally, you can contract now, and there's no obligation for you to have to use the county, no legal obligation. But the House Bill 75 basically was prescriptive in terms of allowing cities to go outside of their jurisdiction to contract with a county that's willing to run an RCV election.
Yeah, great point, Corey. And actually, we're very much committed to helping other counties learn this process and to implement it well. And so, regardless of what you do as a city, we would love to try to persuade and help assist Grand County Clerk, who I know is relatively new, and get them up to speed. I'm confident that any county clerk in the state of Utah can do exactly what we're doing. It's not particularly complex, any more so than anything else that we do in election administration. And so ideally, I would love to sort of help tutor the Grand County Clerk office to actually do this right in Grand County. And if that's not a possibility, we're more than happy to do it as well. But that's all I had to share. Any additional comments from our team, Roseanne or Carly or Andrew, before we start taking some questions?
No, I think you covered it all. And as always, Josh tells a really good story.
So I know one question that this council is going to have, and staff also, is cost.
Yep.
So let me just jump in here on this. Costs associated with this, you will save the cost of a primary election by going to an RCV election. And that's one of the benefits, both to the city and also to the candidates that run for election. So rather than having to run a primary election where you've got fewer voters actually voting in those primary elections, you have one election. It's in the general election date, and at that election, you have more voters because more people vote in November than they do in a primary election. And then in addition to that, you're saving the cost of having to run a primary election. So, and then Josh, I'll let you talk about the specific cost.
Yeah. So we studied the specific costs of administering municipal elections in 2019. And determined that it had costs us $2.25 per active registered voter for each election, the primary and the general. So what we've done is told cities that we're working with in Utah County, we will guarantee a cap on the cost of $2.25. We think it'll come in less because we've got some savings that we might find both in economies of scale, with there being more mayoral races this year than in 2019 in Utah County. So a little bit higher participation, which actually brings down the unit cost. And also the state has some money available to defray some of our annual maintenance costs on our machines with our ES&S vendor. So in no case would it be more than $2.25, and we're hopeful it'll actually be under even $2.20 per active registered voter. And then to Corey's point, if you historically have had a primary and you want to use ranked choice voting as a way to not worry about having a primary and just only having a general, then that cuts your annual cost in half. So I don't know if you're anticipating a primary this year. How many seats do you have available on the council that are up for?
We have the mayor and 2 council members.
Oh, okay. Mayor and 2 council members. Okay. So so you will, if you have more than 4 candidates file for your 2 spots, if you have 5 candidates, then you're required to have a primary. So if you anticipate having 5 candidates for those 2 council spots, then
Or
you're
more
gonna have
than
to run.
2 mayoral candidates.
That's true. Yeah, if you have more than 3 mayoral candidates,
More
3
than
or
2.
more. Yeah, more than 2.
Yeah.
Great point. So now I don't know what Grand County would charge. The way our cost works is the cities that we work with in our county have all encouraged and agreed to pay the return postage paid, business reply mail. So that means a voter can vote, place the ballot in the mailbox without putting a stamp on it, and you're basically guaranteeing to pay that return postage. If that's the approach you wanted to take, that has an impact on the cost. And so it's about $1.70 in just postage related costs. And then the other, 50 cents is basically other administrative costs, equipment, supplies, things like that. But I think that, like I said, there's a lot of voters that vote this time around. Some of those costs, those sort of overhead, if you will, are kind of fixed. And so that comes down a little bit. So we're hopeful that for cities that we're servicing this year, it'll be under, well under 225, but we just can't guarantee, we have to under state law charge what it costs us. And we're pretty sure it's going to cost us somewhere in the neighborhood of just under 225. So
Summer,
Can you, I'm sorry, Mayor. Go ahead.
Summer, would you please also just share your experience and interpretation of those figures for us with a little historical perspective of did we pay postage in the past and how is this compared to the county?
So I was just looking up, I was trying to find our election ILA from last time. It seems like when we were talking with Audrey and the ranked choice voting folks and Utah County folks that we were somewhere along the lines of like 2,300 registered voters at the time. For the last election, we paid Grand County, I believe, like $13,500 to run our election. My conversations with them is that did not include any staff time and that they are building in some staff time to their proposal for running it for us this year. They're looking to increase it to about 15,000.
And did they pay postage? Was that part of the fee?
I believe so, because I don't think voters were required to put a stamp on their ballot, but I don't remember off the top of my head.
And that seems like very much the same ballpark where you had a primary and a general last time, I'm guessing.
We did.
Yeah. So that's $2 and change per voter, per registered voter for each of those elections last time. That sounds very predictable and reasonable. That's what I wouldn't expect anything significantly different. We've benchmarked ourselves a little bit against, for example, Salt Lake County, and they're estimating about $250, and they have some things that are a little more expensive in Salt Lake County, and yeah, that makes sense. There's some counties that kind of have subsidized the cost a little bit, to your point about the staff time. And so there are some other counties that have quoted cities' prices, more at $2 or just under. And I think in those cases, the county's actually eating some of the cost. And so, technically statute kind of requires you pass on the cost, but there's going to be some variance across the state, I'm sure.
And then can you also take us through the logistics of election night?
Yeah, in fact, I was going to suggest that. Andrew did a very good job of kind of walking through what it might look like if Utah County were to run Moab's election. So Andrew, if you want to just go ahead.
And I think, so from the perspective of staff and then also the perspective of residents.
Mm-hmm. So I just checked, you guys have 5,900 active registered voters. And so one of the options I brought up last time was that we have portable scanners we can bring down.
Is that Grand County or Moab City?
That's Moab City.
We don't, that number's not right.
Yeah, that seems high.
I searched Moab active.
It's got to be the county. We don't have 5,900.
That's more than the residents in the city.
Is there a specific zip code that eliminates all those outside ones?
They're all the same zip code.
Yeah, I bet that it's a zip code issue, and it's throwing in some of the outskirts into Moab City.
So I just pulled up.
We'll work on that number.
I can't find our 2019 numbers, but in 2017 we had 22,511 active registered voters for the city. I will keep looking for 2019.
Okay. Either way, that's not many. So we can do this where we'll bring down some portable scanners, and that's what we'll use to actually tabulate the ballots. We'll also bring down a remote server. It's a laptop. It's not connected to anything outside through Wi-Fi, through Bluetooth, through anything. You have to plug in a USB to do anything with it. And so what election night would look like is we would go through, check in ballots, and the ones that are signature verified and approved, we would scan in those mobile scanners, and we would just load the results into that remote server. And after that, we export a cast vote record. And from there, we would import it into our...
Hold on 1 second. Moving back real quickly. You just said that are signature verified. So is that, Summer, would that be you and your team?
The county, typically the county did the verification of the signatures. I don't know that we've had that discussion as far as the verification process, but I would assume we would get a copy of the voter registration from the county, and that we would have a copy of those signatures to verify. Unless that's something that Utah County does.
Yeah.
So is there any, I remember watching the county clerk do this in one of the elections and gone by, and she's very fastidious about it. And I was impressed about her skills. And I'd be a little concerned if somebody who now verifies signatures didn't have those skills, because mail-in ballots, if they have no other way of verifying, that's their only check that the ballots are actually from whom the signature says they're from.
So we can get access to, we could get the clerk, we could work in conjunction with the clerk down there to have a login to Vista so that we would be able to do the signature verification. We do that for our voters in our county, and we would be able to do that. We've done it before. I've been a part of that. When I worked in Salt Lake County previously, we share, the city of Draper is split between Salt Lake County and Utah County. And so we had to share login, have a guest login so that we would be able to do that signature verification. So I would be able to do that, to make that work. We can make that happen. And there is also a level of comfort that comes to the voters and to your city council in having us do that as the election official, as if we're administering the election, instead of having your city recorder do that.
That was also part of House Bill 75 in terms of the requirement for counties to share that data across other counties.
Okay, so let me ask a related question. For this particular election coming up, it's relatively clean. If we just got three mayor and 2 council seats, for example. In other words, there's nothing else on the ballot at that time that would be not ranked choice voting, if we elect to go that way. But I can see other elections, perhaps, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, where we might be inclined to do ranked choice voting for one particular races on the ballot, and then not do ranked choice voting for another species of election at that time. Does that ever happen, or are we always talking about either ranked choice or not?
You can mix and match. So you could have a scenario where you have, let's say in the general election, 2 candidates for mayor. That's not ranked choice voting. And then a multiple of candidates for city council that does necessitate ranked choice voting. And you can have a ranked choice style election for one race and not for another, and you can mix and match that within the ballot. That's not a problem for our system.
Yeah, but wouldn't it, if we did just exactly that, Josh, thank you, would some of the paperwork then go to the county clerk if we farm that out like we usually do to them, and the remainder of it would go to you guys?
No, I think you would just go with one administration, and because you're talking about the exact same ballot, just one ballot, and on that ballot you might have a ranked choice vote and then not a ranked choice vote, but the entire process of processing that ballot, you just want one point of administration, whether that's Grand County Clerk or Utah County. And I mean, I'll say, look, we will do whatever it takes to help you be successful. And I'm also pretty confident that no matter what they think today, we could help the Grand County Clerk's office get up to speed to do this well, or collaborate with them in some way, shape, or form to facilitate it. So, but I will tell you, if you want to, and you know, that's the way you want to go, or that's the way it needs to be, we'll do 100% of the work for you. If that's how you want to arrange it, and you know, Grand County's not willing to do some share of it, but you know, we'll do as much or as little as we need to help you be successful, and as much or as little as Grand County is willing to do. You know, because basically, to your point about the election, let's walk through just real quick how the election works, step by step, right? You know, on the one hand, you have candidate filing. That's 100% the role of the city, and your city recorder will facilitate candidates coming into the office and filing. When we know who the candidates are, that's when your election administration gets involved, whether that's our county clerk or Grand County clerk. Then you begin what's called the ballot design. You're designing the paper ballot, what it looks like, what the names are that are on it, what order those names are on. You're designing those ballots for each of the precincts in the city of Moab. Then you're facilitating the printing of those ballots with a printer. And then you're stuffing those into the envelopes so that they can be mailed to the voter. And then those ballots are going out to the voter by mail. Then those voters are filling those ballots out, they're sending them back. Or maybe some voters are showing up in person and they're getting a replacement paper ballot, and they're voting on that paper ballot early or on election day, and they're scanning it right on site at your polling location at your city office. The elections office then receives back the returned envelope with the paper ballot voted on and folded inside the envelope. Well, now the real election administration begins, which is we look at the outside of that envelope, and we look at the affidavit and the signature of the voter, and we compare it to the voter registration record and the signature on file to determine that that voter indeed sent us that ballot. Once that ballot is verified on a signature basis, it's authorized to be opened. So then we open that envelope, we extract the paper ballot, and then we flatten the paper ballot. Then we scan the paper ballot on our scanners. And then we have a system that tabulates those votes, tallies up a vote for John, a vote for Susan, et cetera. That's all software based. And then on election night, when all is said and done, you know, we sort of hit total and we export the results that we have thus far. Tends to be 85 to 90% of the ballots are basically ready to report by the end of the election night. And everything I have described up until this moment is everything that every other county does. Grand County, Utah County, Weber County, we all do the exact same thing. It's just what you do next, where you take that final data report of the election totals. And in the ranked choice vote scenario, you take that data sheet and you run it through a software that takes 5 minutes, and it produces the ranked choice vote result. And so if a county says, well, we don't know how to do ranked choice voting, then what they're telling you is they're not willing to learn a 5-minute process with a software that literally takes less than a dozen clicks. So I'm confident that we can help train any county in Utah to do that process. And if they're not able to do that, we're more than happy to do all the steps I just discussed, plus the 5 minutes at the end. But I mean, I could see a scenario where Grand County's like, oh, if that's all it takes, we can do everything up until that end. And if you could help us, Utah County, with that last little piece, we'd be happy to help for free. Or even do that ourselves and say, okay, give us that file here in Utah County. We'll run it through our system and spit out the results for you. But otherwise, you know, Grand County did a great job of the 2020 presidential election. They had to follow all of those steps up until the very end. And that ranked choice voting process at the very end to produce the results and then maybe display them in that chart that I showed you, you know, that's a few minutes at the end at the reporting phase. So we can be as involved or not. But if, you know, I'm just here to say, look, if Moab wants to try out ranked choice voting, we will do whatever is necessary to help you be successful, even if Grand County's not ready to support it. So.
Should we go back to the process and have Andrew? Oh, Ronnie, you have a question? And then let's get back to Andrew about the process.
Yeah, that was kind of my question, because I just thought maybe it helps us and people watching to understand, like, you know, say we were doing this normally and we had 6 people running for 2 city council slots. You know, we'd have a primary that would, the top 4 vote getters would go on to the election. 2 people would be eliminated, and then a final election. Whoever got the most votes out of those 4, the top 2 vote getters, would become the council members. But can you kind of run through a scenario like that to let us know how that works in the ranked choice voting process, or whatever scenario you want to put forth?
Yeah, so if you have a scenario where you've got 2 spots and 4 is the limit for the general election, and so if you had 5 or 6 candidates that were running, how does that tabulation process work? So here's how that works. You look at all the votes that were cast for, let's say, the 6 candidates. And then you say, okay, we are going to look at first place votes only. And we're going to take all 6 candidates and we're going to see who got how many first place votes, from the most to the least. And if any of the candidates get 50% of first place votes, then that's it. They win one of those seats. They got a majority. But if one of them did not, then what we will do is we will look at the candidate of the 6 that got the least amount of first place votes. That candidate is eliminated. Then you look at the specific votes that were cast for that particular losing or eliminated candidate, and you take those votes and you then credit to one of the other candidates the second place vote of those particular voters who had cast a first place vote for that eliminated candidate. And so you redistribute votes in that manner. And then you see again, did anybody get a majority? And then you just repeat the process until one of the 6 candidates gets a majority. Once they've gotten a majority, then that candidate wins one of the 2 spots. Then you go through the process again for spot number 2. But of course you would eliminate the winner, because the winner won spot number 1. So that person gets eliminated. And you run the process all over again, and you redistribute as necessary. And you basically are replicating what might happen if you had multiple rounds of voting, like in a convention, or if you were in person and physically casting ballots, and pick one name of the 6. Who got the least amount of votes? Now they're out. Let's vote again for the 5, right? You could do that process. You literally invite the whole town into the city hall, and you could do that physically like they might have done 1,000 years ago. So, but this is cool. Technology makes that all happen in 2 minutes.
I have a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
On the rcviz.com, the examples in government.
Yep.
In the Utah 2019 election, there's 2019 Payson City Council seat 1, 2, and 3, which I think describes what you just described.
Yep.
And then the 2019 City of East Point, it says multi-winner, but it links to the Portland mayoral race. I'm wondering if that multi-winner scenario is also analogous to Moab City.
Good question. Let me look here. I'm looking at the Portland 2015 mayoral race, or is it a different one?
Well, if you click on the 2019 City of East Point.
East Point, okay, multi-winner, okay.
Multi-winner sounds like what Moab is, but I'm not sure. But then it pulls up the Portland 2015 mayoral race.
Oh, yeah. So I think that's slightly an error on their part. They may have either mistitled the data that they uploaded to create that chart. So I'm not certain if the data I'm looking at truly is the mayoral race or is the East Point multi-winner race. Oh, it is the Portland mayor, because I looked at their Portland mayor chart and it's the same name.
Yeah.
So,
Hey,
so
Josh.
here's the thing. You're not going to have a single chart for a multi-winner race. So the RCVis, the visualization tool you're talking about, the only way to visualize a multi-winner, which is analogous to you have multiple winners, 2 winners. The only way to do that is to say, well, there's actually 2 seats, and we're going to run the process 2 times, one to fill the first seat, one to fill the second seat.
Yeah.
Now, there is a separate, different approach to a cousin, if you will, of ranked choice voting, where they actually are not filling multiple seats. what they're actually doing is replicating what would be called a proportional representation. And that is a separate philosophical approach to how you elect people. And within the ranked choice voting universe, it's a possibility that you could choose. It's not a possibility under Utah law. Perhaps it could be in the future, but it's not right now. But it's what they call single transferable vote. And what it does is it approximates proportional representation. And it tends to be the preferred method of using ranked choice voting in a multi-winner environment. But it is not how it's done in Utah. In Utah, we look at it as 2 at-large seats. You could almost name them A and B, and all the candidates are vying for seat A or seat B.
Yep, thank you.
I've got some visuals from Payson's that I think might help a bit if I can share my screen.
Yeah, you should have the option. There you go.
Okay, can you all see it?
I think you'll
Okay,
need to zoom. It's very, very, very small for
We
my
can see it, but we can't read it.
aging eyes.
Okay. Is this better?
Getting better. Much better.
Okay, so this is a cast vote record. This is what we would export after the votes have been scanned and tabulated. And so it kind of shows here what we'll take this ballot record, who they voted for first choice, second choice, third choice, and fourth choice. In this case, they didn't vote for anyone for fourth. And then when we look at, this is the actual visual representation of it. You can see here, Scott Pinkham had the least amount of votes. So when we moved around 2, he was eliminated and his votes were redistributed. So if we go here to first choice and we find those who voted for Scott Pinkham, what would happen is after he's eliminated, all of these people would then have these votes added to their totals. And this happens round and round and round until we have someone who reached the majority, in this case, 1,304 votes. So I don't know if that helps kind of show what happens with ranked choice. This is the data that goes into it. And this is the visual process of how it actually flows afterwards with each round by round.
I think that's really helpful to see. And it's also really helpful to hear too from Josh that the election's the election. It's just how you process the data at the very end that determines whether it's ranked choice or winner versus loser. And I just want to say too, to the council, because Summer, can I give you the floor to just share a little more specifics about cost?
Sure. So
Okay.
I finally found our 2019 ILA, and it just gives us an estimate. The county actually charged us $350 plus $2.81 per ballot. And we had a total of 2,594 registered voters in the city. They also had a charge for $16.54 per hour per employee for any vote recount, election system audit, election contest, or similar event. I don't have the invoice in front of me to see if we were charged for any of those items.
And then was that for primary and then final?
They charged that for the primary, and then they charged that same amount for the general.
And then I love that I called it the final countdown. And then so basically what we're looking at is like, this is a 2-part decision. The first part is going with Utah County to run the election instead of Grand County. And then by doing so, having them do the data analysis at the end to call it ranked choice instead of regular, for lack of a better label. Am I correct here, Summer and Josh and Joel? Yeah. And then what I want to make sure of, and why I was asking Andrew the process question on the staff side, as well as on the, the front end, on the back end, is that I want to make sure, Joel, that we have the capacity in the recorder's office to be able to handle the the coordination with Utah County, and that it feels like the same kind of election that our residents are, expect to have, so that on election night at 10 p.m., you're either drinking champagne or you're drinking champagne, depending on the results.
Sipping or guzzling, I think, is the difference, right?
You're either doing it with a bunch of people or like in the backyard by yourself.
We
we would be able to have. Go ahead.
We do have the capacity, Mayor, in the recorder's office to be able to do this summer, and then are in the office on election night till about midnight, regardless, and they have the capacity to do this as well. So.
And we would have one of our staff members there. So if there's any questions, any technical issues or whatnot going on, we would have someone there to be able to take care of all of that.
I'd like to clarify too, because when we spoke on the phone or through Zoom last week, we talked about kind of the logistics of it and how it would look. The ballots would still be addressed to the city of Moab. The city of Moab would collect the ballots. We would have a drop location like we did for the last election. We have a voting booth so people can come and vote in person if they wanted to. For the appearance of it is that, it is a city election, and then we would contract with Utah County for the counts and the verification, but it would not look any different than our elections in the past.
Is there ever a scenario where that first place winner would not get a majority?
Yeah, so Tawny, it's a great question. On the first round, it's generally the case that no one person has a majority. And that's common, right? Because, and I'll share my screen real quick just to show the Payson example.
Can I also throw out that we don't have districts? All of our seats are at large. So that makes it a little bit easier as far as ballot printing.
Yeah, great. And that is the typical case for most cities. So if you can see my screen, and I'll actually zoom in a little bit here. This is Payson City Council, the first seat. So in round one, none of the candidates got a majority of first place votes, which makes sense. When you typically think of city council elections, the person who wins generally doesn't get 50% or more of all the votes cast. They get the most votes. They get, in the parlance, a plurality. So if this was a plurality election, you would say, well, Doug won seat number 1 and Linda won seat number 2. Maybe Brian Hewlett won seat number 3 if applicable. Well, we don't really know what would have happened if we enforce a majority rule. But in the ranked choice voting situation, you say, well, okay, let's see what happens if we eliminate one of the candidates and redistribute the preference votes of the voters. And that's what you do in round 2. Scott Pinkham gets eliminated. Some of his votes are redistributed then between the other candidates. Round 3, Stockwell's eliminated. There's more redistribution. You can see where the trend is going here. Doug Welton's likely to win the seat. And then ultimately, after 4 rounds of redistribution, Brian Hewlett's eliminated. Doug Welton wins by a majority. So to your point, the only way you wouldn't get a majority is if you got to this point and Doug and Linda were tied. And if Doug and Linda were tied, which is highly unlikely, it's just a very rare outcome. But if they were tied right at the majority threshold, neither had a majority and they were tied, yeah, then I suppose you would have to use the statutory prescribed tiebreaker method, which is random. It's coin toss, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But in this scenario, if Doug and Linda were tied and there were 2 or 3 seats available, well, what do you think is going to happen when we go to fill seat number 2? Well, if Doug's not in the running for seat number 2 because he won seat number 1, it's pretty likely Linda is going to win seat number 2. And in this scenario, Linda did win seat number 2. So even if they were tied on that first seat, Linda's still going to win a seat on the city council. But, you know, a tie is always a possibility in every election. They're very rare. I once did a campaign in Texas where a lady won the city council by one vote. You know, absolutely one vote. It came down to one vote. But so that happens. But yeah, you just continue to go until somebody gets a majority. And I've never seen a tie in ranked choice voting in a broad election like this. In a small election with maybe only 20, 30 voters, I've seen ties in ranked choice voting. But I've never seen a tie in ranked choice voting in this, you know, a legitimate election, public election with, you know, hundreds or thousands of voters. I've never seen a tie, but it can happen. So I hope that answers the question.
So can we go back to the Brady Bunch screen where we're not sharing screen
Yes,
anymore?
let me get.
No worries, no
stop
worries.
my screen sharing here. Stop share. There we go.
We're just at 6:56, and at this point, I think, you know, we've got to move on to our budget meeting. I wasn't sure we were going to spend a whole hour on this, but clearly we had some questions, and this is really important information, especially if we decide to move forward. But can I get a sense from the council, because what we need to do if we would like to move forward with ranked choice voting, what we will need to do is get pretty aggressive, because we need to have that decision in place and contract, I think, in place with Utah County. Otherwise, we're, you know, as of June 1st, we're going to be, you know, taking candidates' names and then planning for a primary, perhaps. So, and then I think also, Summer, isn't there a deadline to make the decision May 30th to the
May 10th? We have to notify the Lieutenant Governor's office if we want to participate in ranked choice voting.
How does the governor feel about ranked choice voting? Has the governor come out in support of ranked choice voting?
Yeah, let me jump in here. Couple points I want to make, Mayor, and I know our time is short, and thank you. The Governor Cox actually supports ranked choice voting. In fact, particularly in municipal elections, for this pilot program. The other point that I want to make related to moving to an RCV election, your filing deadline for candidacy is moved from June to August. So it goes from August 10th to the 17th when you actually have to file for candidacy, which again plays into the length of a campaign. So
I love that. All right, so council, let me ask this. I know we have, you know, we probably have more questions. This wasn't an exhaustive session. And we can certainly do our research and get more information, and hopefully you're all willing to be contacted by any one of us with questions that we might have. But is anyone on this council opposed to moving forward with ranked choice voting for our election this year?
Well, I guess I will offer, Mayor, that I'm still interested. Whether or not I elect to do it, I'm still waiting for all of it to settle in my mind, and still considering the cost questions and logistic questions and so forth. And I've read too, guys, I mean, I'm intrigued by the idea. I really like the idea, but I've also read that it doesn't often change the results. I mean, as opposed to what you would get with plurality and so forth. If that's wrong, you guys should let me know now, but
well, in regards to the cost, Mike, it would be cheaper to go through Utah County than it would Greene County.
I would like to see all the costs summarized in a table. I mean, we've gotten it verbally. And I'll just say that, like, it's interesting. I'm intrigued, but I don't want my silence to become acquiescence. So no, I'm not ready to move forward. But I'm like 50-50.
Okay.
I'm kind of in the 50-50 too. I'll fully admit, when I first read about this, I thought this is some shady way to do this. I don't like that. The more I read about it, the more that I can see it has pluses and minuses. And in my old brain, it's like, I've done this for 45 years this way, and this is a good way. So, I'm willing to continue to look at it.
And Ronnie?
Yeah, I just, it's good we have a little bit of time. I was just gonna take some time to talk to residents, just so I know what they want.
So then our next step would be, Summer, can you just give us next step?
Yeah, so what we can do is we need to decide, we'll pass a resolution. If we decide to go with ranked choice voting, that information will go to the Lieutenant Governor's office. If you decide not to go that direction, then we will need to do the ILA with Grand County.
And so we'll put that resolution on our meeting in 1 week.
Yeah, for the April 27th, that gives us the time to be able to get that information to the Lieutenant Governor.
And so if council members have questions and need help in deciding between now and our council meeting, who should we call? Joel?
Mayor, why we have this group here rather than try and reconfigure this, or do we want to spend a little extra time with this group to ask further questions and get that out of the way where we're on such a short crunch with ILA and all of that?
Well, I think part of what this council needs to do is reach out to residents and our various tribes and say what, and ask what others are thinking, and then doing some research online. Yeah, Joel?
I agree. It's not an either or. I agree all that needs to happen. But before we dismiss this group, I think we should exhaust this group's knowledge and questions that they can answer, so we don't have to circle back to this portion of it as well at some point.
Yeah, Ronnie?
I'm just realizing some of our residents may end up having questions that we can't answer because, none of us have as much experience with it as you do. So, is one of you, like Josh or someone, kind of a point person for questions that we can send residents to? Or, you guys mentioned, the one site, is that a good go-to site for the general layperson resident, or you want us to send our residents somewhere else to learn a little more?
We have, Utah Ranked Choice Voting has a website that they can go to that has a lot of the information that we've talked about. So yeah, I mean, it's Utah Ranked Choice Voting .org, I think it is. I should know that off the top of my head.
And Ronnie, I will say that both Corey and Audrey have been great at answering my questions. And I've reached out to Audrey. I've had several conversations with her. So if there is a question that you guys have and we don't know the answer, reach out. I can make a call, and they've been more than willing to help.
Okay, no, thanks a lot. That's just, I don't know what questions people will end up having.
We will also have, we're going down to the League of Cities and Towns convention. We're going to have an exhibition booth down there. So if you happen to be attending there, stop in. Would love to have a conversation.
Okay, thanks. No, it's great. I know I've seen either you or someone else there before, and I cast my ballot for my rabbit versus my elephant versus my duck or whatever it was.
Well, and I think it's important to point out too that the legislature, I believe, allocated some money for educational purposes for ranked choice voting. So, residents may be confused just listening to this conversation, but there, Lisa met with us when we met with these folks last week, and just to be aware of what kind of public outreach and public education you might need to have to educate and inform voters.
Yes. Well,
thank you, Mayor.
Yes, I do, Joel, I do want to move on because I don't know how long we're going to be for the budget. And I do want a hard stop at 8 o'clock.
I want to thank you guys so much. It's great.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for taking time out of your evening away from family and dogs and food to join us. And some of us will see you in St. George.
Tawny, I'm going to look you up in the yearbook.
Okay.
So adorable.
Okay. Those pictures.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you
And
so
we'll
much
see you
for having us.
Summer, let's go ahead and bring Ben into the meeting. And
we have department heads as well.
Awesome. And Joel, 8 o'clock.
That sounds great to me.
Okay.
Let's let everyone get in here real quick and we'll Okay. So a couple things real quick. Under state code, we're required by the first meeting or before the first meeting in May, we have to adopt the tentative budget. So tonight we wanted to focus on those areas you guys brought up in our last budget meeting, police, public works, sewer, water, and try and get those things squared away before our next meeting. So as we adopt the tentative budget. As we move into our next meeting and our next budget meeting, that's when we're going to begin focusing on the budget itself and property tax and those presentations. In a normal year, the tentative budget's not as important. We adopt the tentative budget, we move into June, we adopt the formal budget, and we never actually use the tentative budget. If after our information for property tax is taken and we decide that truth in taxation process is what we want to, is the way we want to go and consider a property tax, then we will actually operate under the tentative budget from July 1 to August 17th approximately. Now, even if you didn't adopt a property tax at that time and we adopted a normal budget as, you know, in line with what we've done in the years past, we would still actually operate under that tentative budget for about a 45-day window. So we wanted to focus tonight on the tentative budget, make sure we had these areas squared away, and then move toward getting the tentative budget adopted at the next meeting and move forward into the property tax and final budget discussion moving forward. Does that make sense? I did that quick. All right, so the main areas which
Well, and so I just want to say, like, the tentative budget I've put on the consent agenda. So just to be super clear, at our next council meeting in a week, this tentative budget is going to be on consent agenda because we're passing it so that we can talk about it.
one thing that we want to talk, yep, and one thing, if we want a consent agenda, that's great. In the tentative budget, we always adopt the COLA and that number. And normally, again, that doesn't matter because we adopt the final budget, we move forward. But this year we would actually adopt a tentative budget with those merit increases, and we would be working under that budget for about a 45-day window. If when we adopt the final budget with the property tax or without, that will have the actual COLA and final merit information in it. And so we need to understand that what we adopt in the tentative budget may not match what we adopt in the final budget up or down. And that's something we need to be mindful of going forward. Okay.
So how do you want to structure this? Yeah, Joel.
So tonight, if we have all the department heads here, I'm going to turn it over to Ben. Unless you guys have a specific department you want to start with, we're just going to hurry and try and go through them and take questions as they come for each department you guys requested for further review. No requests. You're just going to let us start where we want.
Let's start with the PD.
All right, PD it is. Ben?
Hi, Chief.
If there's no preference, I've got slides here. So, you mind if we go in? We can go in any order. I will.
Let's see what your slides show.
I think the slides put us at the water department first, but we can skip all the way to the end for the PD if you'd like.
No, let's follow your template, Ben.
Okay, perfect.
We'll give Brett a break.
So because so we're focusing on those 5 primary departments, and basically this is going to get into the weeds a little bit. So this isn't the prettiest of presentations, but hopefully it accomplishes what we're looking for. There's not a lot of charts, not a lot of graphical displays, but the 2 enterprise funds I did do, in this case, I did a waterfall chart for the water department. And if you haven't seen a waterfall chart before, basically what it does is it builds up your revenues, it takes out your expenses, adds back any or subtracts out any non-operating, and then it shows you your net income. As you know, with an enterprise fund, your net income is not the end of the story. So then you have all your capital items, capital projects, equipment, debt payments, and reserve contribution. And so in this case, we have a net operating income budgeted in the water department of $652,000. But after you take out all of our debt service and capital acquisition, then we end up with a negative reserve contribution. So basically, the next one is where we really get into the weeds. And this is where I think the discussion will happen with the department. So each department's going to have just kind of a list of line items. There ended up being 713 line items in the budget. If you haven't didn't count them all up yourself, but so 713 line items. And what I've done with this budget is just pull out each of those 5 departments for discussion, for points of discussion, and primarily the expenses. If we want to switch at any time to seeing the full income and expenses, we can do that. I've got that queued up and ready to go, just not in the slide. So basically kind of on a high level, the water operating expense here, this accounts for a 42% increase in water revenue. That's not shown here again because it's expenses only. That was due to the water rate increase that was done last year. One of the major increases here is the water general fund overhead allocation. You'll see that it went from 391,000 to 486,000. That was, and Rachel can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that rate was not adjusted in fiscal year 2021. So that's why there was a big bump in the general overhead allocation for that, for the general fund allocation. So, but other than that, there was a general reduction in other expenditures in the water operating budget, which resulted in, you'll see down here is overall 3% reduction. So last year's budget was 1.3 million. This is 1.3 million and slightly less. There is some new debt service in the water department. That's in part why there was the debt payments in the prior slide increased. And then there were some capital projects that are being worked on as well for this year. So that this slide outlines those. There's a $25,000 public works building, some water system upgrades, and purchase of water meters. So with that, I'll open it up for questions for the water department or for me.
Should we, I kind of wonder if we should unshare after each.
Yep.
I can't see everybody, so I want to just have a meaningful conversation. So let's start off with, does anyone have questions for Ben or for, I guess, Levi? Ronnie?
Well, I don't know if this is exactly for you guys, but related, I just have my little question in the wings. So whoever's most excited can make the most noise. But in the sense that we thought we might get more money from the feds, and we just have that question out there of, should it sit in the general fund, or should we use it for one-time expenses? So that's in the back of my mind. Like if we did get $500,000 or $600,000, would we be better served to have that sit and grow, or to use it for some infrastructure that to make a little headway on some more infrastructure that needs replacement? So anyway, that's just my question in the wings for water and sewer and infrastructure in general as we go forward.
So to answer that real quick, the 1.2 that we have and the 6 approximately that we're getting is sitting there growing for now. One-time expense is preferable. And at mid-year, when we reopen the budget, after we've kind of weathered out the end of this, we'll bring that to you guys for that decision at that point. We're proposing right now that we sit just a little longer and wait just a little longer and see how the end of, or how the new normal shakes forward.
Well, the only thing I would say about this is that we do have the, and Chuck, this involves you too, is that on our next Tuesday's meeting, the capital projects list. And so it just feels like with this budget, it's like everything depends on everything. I'm quite impressed with the waterfall chart.
The CIP is on the next agenda for approval, and CIB is going forward. The money is there as we move through CIB. If there are projects that we feel are pressing that need to come forward, we'll bring those at that time and make a decision. And like I said, the remainder we'd at a later time bring that forward.
And, in the past, we've asked department head, like, does that look good? Does that look good to you, Levi?
Yeah, I think we can continue doing our jobs with that budget. Looks good. Great job, Ben.
Because
Joel.
you are, Levi, doing a really awesome job.
And we have an amazing team down here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, unless there's any other questions or comments about measuring water availability and springs, which I always am like pushed to put on our budget. Ronnie, what were you going to say? The same
Just a
thing?
real quick thing. Can I have a quick reminder? The 25,000 for building. Can you just remind us? I mean, obviously we have our dream of a entire new public works building, but I know 25K ain't going to guess much. So just remind me what that's for.
It's kind of a shared expense throughout public works. Just some minor upgrades. It's by far, and it's not going to get a new facility. A shed, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
I assumed it was just triage funds, building triage, Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid fund.
We've continuously worked on the building over the last year and a half, 2 years. Levi's done a great job. We've rewired the facility in most areas that were having problems. The facilities crew has been down there. They've repainted most of it. They've done a lot of work to improve what we have. At the end of the day, it's still a 50-year-old building.
Okay, well, let's move on then, Ben, to your next slide, which I am assuming is the next department.
Water department, sewer department. So kind of before I pull that up, thanks Levi, but I take no credit for this. This was Joel, Rachel, Danny. They did all the heavy lifting. I think Joel asked me to present so that I could get more familiar with the budget. This is just a learning experience for me. So.
And by Joel, Rachel, Danny, he means Rachel.
Oh, we know, Joel. We know.
So the sewer department is where the waterfall gets a little scary. I'm not much of a water guy, but this is where the rapids go to class 5 or whatever the scary ones are, because this is where we see that our income from sewer funds barely covers the expenses. So you end up with a net income of $320,000 budgeted this year, and then with debt payments of $762,000. So an overall, what we'd call a reserve contribution is negative as well, but severely more so than the water department was. I'll flip to the next slide and then we'll go back to viewing everybody. So the sewer department has essentially 2 different operating budgets. We've got the WRF operating expenses and then the collection system as well. And here I pasted in the expenses for the collection system. So generally, that's one thing that I've noticed is everybody's tightened their belts here. Department heads have been really willing to tighten their belts in this time. And the kind of the negative image that's cast as a result of that negative reserve contribution has nothing to do with people getting all the wishes they want for all the projects that they want done.
I really appreciate that explanation. Thank you, Ben. Well, I think we all knew that the scary class 5 rapids were happening. And Tawny?
Do we have an approximate time frame on when the rate study will be done or when we can implement that?
We're working on that as fast as possible. It'll be probably 3 to 4 months. I talked to Susie Becker about it today. Obviously, it'll go out to RFP because of the amount total, but we're preparing that and we should get it out here in the next week or so and get the bid process done and get someone working on it and bring it back to you for adoption. We also met with GWISA and San Juan Special Service District for sewer services. They're aware of what's happening and on board with what's happening. And like we discussed last time, it will be system-wide. and they're prepared to approach their boards about the situation and seek a resolution that affects all users, as everyone's in the same boat we are.
And so it probably wouldn't be done in time to adopt it for fiscal year 2021-22, but would we do a budget opening, or would it just go into effect on September 1st or whatever?
Well, Rachel, do you want to answer that exactly how that's going to work? I can explain it, but you'll do a better job.
Yeah, sorry, let me unmute myself. So I'm sorry, Tanya, can you repeat the question? Was it when the new rates would go into effect?
We probably wouldn't have this rate study and done in time to adopt it into the budget for fiscal year 21-22. Would we do a budget opening, or would we just say after all of the public hearings and everything, it would just go into effect September 1st or October 1st? Just remind me of that process.
Yeah, you could certainly do a mid-year rate increase, and you could do that anytime during the year. You could go through the separate public hearing process to increase the rates. And then typically you do a mid-year budget opening. So at that point, if those rates are already in place, you would just reflect that in your revenue at the mid-year budget opening. So you'd increase the sewer revenue for how many ever months that new rate structure would be in place. If it was 6 months or 8 months, it just depends on when you get those rates back and when you get them adopted.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, no problem.
Can I ask how much of the general fund we've contributed to sewer in the past?
0.
So this is a new hit to our bottom line.
I don't think the presented budget reflects any money going from the general fund to the sewer department.
Well, I thought Ben was showing that we had a 400 some thousand contribution from general fund to make up the difference in his waterfall.
So that was the overhead allocation. The $400,000 deficit would come from the fund balance, essentially. So what the sewer department's reserves would be paying.
It's the sewer department's general fund. It's their.
Oh, got it.
And actually, Mayor,
the sewer department's general fund.
Sorry, what was that?
Yeah.
How much is in the sewer department's general fund?
Rachel and I just looked at that today. Let me get that pulled up.
and
Just
Mayor,
under $1 million. So it's 965,000 as of March.
And what else does that have to pay for?
Any capital expenditure. So in a typical year, your debt service would be paid for out of that. Capital projects that aren't financed.
So
it would be 2 years that we'd blow our general fund.
Well, Mayor, normally there's $900,000 in there. And so 400,000 of that's being pulled out this year to cover the difference, to cover that bond. So there will be 500,000 essentially at the end of that. Next year, your $900,000 will be due again on the bond, and you won't have enough to cover it. So to be clear, when you adopt this budget, it will be balanced for this year because of the money in the sewers general fund. And if we didn't do that budget opening that Tanya was talking about, it is a balanced budget sheet for 21-22. We will not be able to balance it out again next year. So we have to adopt these rates. We have to get this squared away over the next, 3 to 4 months, preferably, but before we get to the end of the fiscal year when we have to do this again, because we will not be able to do this again. Normally that general fund is used to do improvements to collections and the plant as needed.
And so if we didn't have enough money in the sewer general fund, we would pay for the expense out of our general fund.
There's separate line items, they're separate businesses. So you could technically do that, but it's a loan. You cannot just move the money from one to the other. So if we took $500,000 out of our general fund next year to pay the sewer fund, you would owe from the sewer fund $500,000 to your general fund. And over time, you would have to pay that money back.
And Mayor, I did just want to point out that both the water and the sewer fund and the storm drain fund make payments to the general fund every year. to help offset overhead expenses. So administrative costs, payroll, accounts receivable. And this year, those three funds combined are injecting about $1 million into the general fund. Out of
So
those.
it actually works the other way, where someone like Levi's position, where he's the public works director, but he's also technically the water supervisor. So whatever portion of Levi's job is being done supervising the water, we can pay that out of the water funds because it is a water expense. So a portion of Levi's salary is being paid by the water department, by the water funds.
Along with a portion of the city manager's salary and the treasurer's salary and the HR director's salary and the attorney's salary and so on and so forth.
Yep. So
What
the
are
money
the
actually-
what are the revenue sources for the sewer
rates,
fund, general fund,
Just
and impact
rates.
fees. And impact fees.
and impact fees?
No, I'm sorry, that fund balance does not include impact fees because that is restricted. The impact fee fund balance is separate. It's not allocated in that 900,000 because it's restricted by the state.
That is true, but it is a revenue source for sewer that we do use to replace and use in sewer.
So rates. If we were to implement a property tax, could the property tax go toward the sewer general fund?
I think Rachel's giving you the answer with a shake of her head.
No, property tax cannot be used for enterprise funds. They have to be run as businesses. So they have to be supported by their ratepayers, not by property tax.
And is this because our sewer plant was just really expensive?
No. Go ahead. No, it's not because your sewer plant was really expensive. It's that our rates were never in place to justify the replacement of the plant, and we used impact fees from hotels to cover the additional cost. And impact fees from hotels are no longer coming in, and there's no guarantee that they will over the duration of the bond payment. And so this is just a problem that was created several years ago that we're now dealing with.
And I agree with Joel. I think because we were the beneficiary of impact fees, substantial impact fees for so long, our rates were artificially low in both water and sewer. And so instead of maintaining rate increases every year, we were relying on those impact fees.
Hotel impact fees were offsetting residents' rates.
But did we bond against impact fees or rates or what for the sewer plant?
Impact fees.
Well, both really, because we had a rate structure that was supposed to be in place that had rate increases over the next 10 years.
So if we got a big chunk of money for COVID, could we put it towards sewer? Which then would free up.
That doesn't fix our problem though, because if you dropped all $1.7 million of COVID money into this account, it would pay your sewer WRF bond payment for 2 years. And in 2 years, you're right back to this same problem that your rates are not paying your bond. You're just kicking the can if we do that.
Okay. So, but staff is recommending that these are the numbers that we pass this year and that we get aggressive with our sewer rates.
Yes, or we will lose our bonding capacity for sewer altogether and potentially citywide.
And the sewer, because we can't make a payment. And
We
there
can
are
make the-
hardship grants available.
We can make the payment this year. We're approximately $500,000 short from being able to make it in the 22-23 fiscal year, which would go in next year's budget.
And just continuing this very difficult conversation, when we were talking about doing a property tax increase and all residents were paying an extra $100 a year, that was going to get us like 300,000.
$1 million.
That would get us $1 million.
Yes, ma'am.
But that would be a substantial increase to sewer rates. I mean, we need a substantial increase to our sewer rates to be able to cover these payments that we're owing. And then how would we reflect statewide on our sewer rates? Where would we fall in sewer rates based on other municipalities in the state? Would
I
we be
can't
the
answer.
highest or?
We would not be the highest, but I can't answer where we would fall in yet because I don't have that rate number yet. But once I do, that'll be one of the first things first pieces of information I give to you. But we still would not be the highest sewer rate in the state. We have been one of the lowest sewer rates in the state for a long time.
Well, I think we've got to move on because it's 7:30. And because I kind of feel sick to my stomach. So
I want to welcome you to the sewer sick to your stomach feeling. Staff has had it for a little while. And so, yeah, it's not fun. It's a big problem. Yeah.
what's the next slide, Ben?
Public Works Department. And I'm going to, I'll go through these pretty quickly because there are kind of really 6 different lines of business within Public Works itself. So I'll just give a very high overview. I feel like the discussions are more valuable than any slides can provide. So the first is the Streets Department, which we've budgeted at a 14% reduction, even from last year's budget. So from 727 to 622. We have our facilities budget where another reduction, a budgetary reduction of 4% was realized. We also have our fleet with a budgetary reduction of 31% from 282 to 193. Our streets, we already saw streets. And the admin budget as well also saw a significant budgetary reduction, 24% in this case. So Public Works has really, again, tightened the belt, overused the cliche. Class C Road Fund. This was talked about. We don't need to hit on this too much because it was asked in the last work meeting, but there is a $300,000 transfer from restricted Class C reserves to complete projects that are in the works at this point for fiscal year 22.
And is that basic maintenance or are those any bigger projects like Emma?
So those were not major projects. The main one was the chip seal, $300,000 overlay project, and a $220,000 special project. Maybe someone else can speak to that one.
Levi or Chuck?
I'll let Chuck talk about that one.
The special for 220,000. I don't know that I was in that meeting. The chip sale, yes, I recall that.
I think that's actually equipment, Ben. Let me pull it up.
Okay.
And, you know, when Ben's showing those slides, those are reductions in the budget of all those departments because of eliminating of overtime and just, you know, every area we can cut. And those cuts come on top of the cuts we made last year. So it's further cuts that we're making to try and save money. I don't know that we can run any leaner than we're running, to be honest with you.
Okay, so council questions or comments? Caitlin?
Is there a waterfall chart for that one?
There's no waterfall for the Class C road funds.
Hey, Caitlin, don't go chasing waterfalls. I mean, am I the only one?
And I want to.
If you don't know, you don't know.
Oh, sorry.
I want to thank Levi and Mike Cutts and the parks and facilities. You know, those guys get called out on and sewer. They get called out on breaks and Saturdays, Sundays, middle of the night, and they go out and they are managing their budgets to work that out of their normal hours. So they take time out of Mondays and Tuesdays so we don't end up paying the overtime. And them guys have been great to work around it. And the loss of overtime is a loss of income to them. It's not just a matter of saving us money. It's a sacrifice that they make because over years and years and years, overtime has been counted on as a part of income to these employees. And so it's, you know, it's not just as easy as like, great job cutting the overtime. It's actually a sacrifice that they are making as a part of their salaries and revenues that they make as individuals. So they've done a great job.
So that 220,000 is a combination of hot patches, steel coats, concrete, some concrete projects, and ADAs, getting stuff in ADA compliance.
Yeah,
It's a
that's
combination of a bunch of projects.
So it's basic maintenance.
Yes.
It's bare minimum basic maintenance. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? If not, I think we need to go on to the next slide.
So the next up, we have public safety, police department. So there we start off, again, this is kind of a multi-stage discussion, but we've got victims advocacy is one kind of line of business. With
Ben, your screen is not shared. I don't know if that was intentional. After my horrible TLC reference, which is the band that sings the song about waterfalls. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah. So victims advocacy had a slight change in the cost share of the salaries. That's it. And maybe Danny could speak to that if there's a question on that. I believe that's a multi-agency agreement. Or Rachel.
Sorry, I went to my printer. Say that again.
The salaries and wages on victims advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
There was an increase there in the current budget year. That's a cost share with Grand County, is that right?
It's a cost share, and then also there's a grant that comes in, but I believe there were some part-time hours that were budgeted.
So this is a grant that we receive in order to pay for these positions. The new grant that we're receiving has a part-time person that's included. So while the salary went up 30,000, it's actually a pass-through. The money comes to us in the form of a grant, and then we pay it to the salary.
So there's an associated revenue line item for that. Okay.
That's correct.
So beer tax funds. This is kind of another specific line of expenditures for under public safety. For this year, it sounds like those will be the state has allowed those funds to be used on vehicles. So that 28,000 that we're anticipating will fund vehicle lease agreements.
Cheers.
Animal control. Here we have an additional part-time animal control officer, which also results in a reduction in overtime. So about an 11% increase in animal control as a result of that additional position.
And there is a cost sharing with animal control as well, as we provide animal control services for the entire valley.
And then this is the police department. So this is where kind of the bread and butter of what happens downstairs, where that's budgeted. So my only commentary here is that this does not represent any additional officers from fiscal year 2021.
Brett, do you want to talk about this one?
So
sure. What questions do you have?
Real quick to address that point. We've had a couple officers in the budget in the past of those positions we haven't filled. And with the reduction that we've had in officers as of late, we are bringing in new officers on. The budget doesn't indicate new officers, but there's new officer positions built in because we've never reached our capacity. And Brett has also been told that he has the ability to hire 2 additional officers on top of that number as well. So if we can fill the numbers that we've already budgeted and have in the past, then we would come back to you for a budget opening and include those officers at that time.
That seems like really strategic staffing. Hey, Brett, Chief, I just want to say thank you so much for your leadership and your kindness and your strength and your position in this community. I want to thank you for being our chief. Just in light of some, news, I know this is maybe just a very, it's a very tough time to, wear a uniform, and I just want to say thank you. And I want to make sure that you feel good about this budget and that you feel good about what Joel said regarding that hiring strategy, and just give you a chance to speak.
I do. I appreciate that. We have I'll echo Levi's comments about his team. We're fortunate to have an extremely community focused, very dedicated team of both sworn and non-sworn members, and there's absolutely no way we could do what we do if we didn't have their just complete dedication to the community. So a lot of the gratitude has to go to them. They're an amazing team. I do feel good about the strategy that we have. As Joel mentioned, it's been difficult to fill positions in the past. I anticipate that it will always, maybe not always, but for the next few years, it will be difficult to fill positions here for the same reason that it's difficult to fill positions anywhere in the city. It's expensive to live in Moab. It's remote. It's not for everybody. Housing is difficult. So I anticipate that we'll have some of those same issues, but we are doing some creative things to try to attract and retain talent. And I'm hopeful that the efforts that we're making will be fruitful.
And you feel good about this budget proposed?
I do.
Ronnie?
Sorry, because I'm probably like a broken record, but distraction is high and brain cells are low and my retention is bad. So I feel like it always helps me to repeat if we were able to hire for every position, how many officers that would put us at, because I know, in terms of optimal enforcement and other things the department would like to do, we have had some discussions about trying to add 1 or 2 officers a year. So sorry to have you repeat, Joel and Chief, but can you just remind me, and one day I'll keep all this in the same notebook so you don't have to remind me.
So right now we are allocated for 15, and my understanding is that we would be allocated for 17 if we're able to fill all of those positions.
And can you guys remind me, does that include or not include kind of the extra traffic enforcement staff we were hoping to get? I think at one point we were talking about 2 of those.
No, if we're able to get to 17, that provides just basic law enforcement functions and nothing extra.
But those are 17 full-time officers, Brett, or Chief. I think where we're getting lost in translation is we have only had 15 up until this point, and that didn't include a part-time staff. So we're increasing by 2, and then we've also started a part-time unit that's, Brett, do you want to speak to that? So we're increasing 2 full-time officers that can provide additional patrol, and then we also have started a part-time group.
Correct, and we're allocated for 5 part-time officers. Right now we have 2, and we're working to recruit 3 more. The challenging thing with the part-time program is that other local agencies don't allow their law enforcement personnel to work part-time jobs. So we have to recruit from outside of our area, which means that we have to have some place for those officers to stay. So we're hoping to someplace for those officers to stay when they're here working. So we're hoping to work with other agencies in the area, public safety agencies in the area, to find temporary housing for them while they're they're here. But yeah. So that's where the part-time program sits. And if we're able to fill those positions, it would give us the ability to do more proactive law enforcement and some of the other things that we have been asked to do, provided that we can get those officers to come down and work with us as often as we would need them.
And this is a creative way to work through our revenue streams and be able to afford what we're paying for. If this continues, we're able to fill these positions. While we were at 15 last year, it would give us 7 additional officers to pull from on busy weekends on top of the 15 we had prior. So 17 full-time, potentially 22 on those weekends that we're doing. That's one way we're trying to do this within our budget framework.
Mm-hmm.
Without taking too much time, maybe at another time, Joel and Brett, can you guys just offer us, maybe sometime we're discussing Walnut Lane, just a little bit more insight on whether the city should be trying to look to reserve some of those units for some staff? I know it's a different conversation, but obviously we're always, we keep coming back to this housing and accommodation issue. So, I mean, for multiple.
I don't know that it's a different conversation at all. I think it hits at the heart of everything we're trying to do. The mayor and I and Carly met late last week. We discussed the possibility of saving some of those units in Walnut Lane. We also discussed some development, some other areas that we think we could potentially do without bonding, depending on how they pencil, and keep some of those units as well. So it is our largest problem, is finding housing, and we have to solve it, and we have to get into a position where we can transition employees as they come into our city and want to work here, that we are able to provide temporary housing as a part of that offer package and get them here, get them established, get them here long enough to be able to find permanent housing for themselves and get them in that situation, and then provide that to the next employee that comes down the hiring line. So
Okay, thank you.
It is our biggest challenge to getting people here by far. It's not even close.
And these part-timers, they would be here for moments. And so we wouldn't be looking at, we would be looking at potentially studio apartments and not necessarily accommodations for families, or even maybe RV air zones. Like, could we do some RV pads, assuming that some people might come down if they're semi-retired anyway.
Well, there's a lot that goes into this, and I don't mean to try and avoid the question at all, but we have to live by the same rules we pass for everyone, and for us to develop an overnight accommodation RV park, that's not currently allowed. So we have to figure out how to make this work within the framework.
Right, it would be a new development, right? Not allowed.
Yep.
Right. Unless we repurpose an existing. Okay. Unless there are any other questions, it is 7:48, and I did want us to be done by 8 o'clock. And again, Chief, I just want to say thank you. I mean, every time I think of you, I'm just full of gratitude, and just want to make sure that you get all your needs met, so that you can continue to be the good leader that you are and continue to advocate for your officers.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it.
Okay, then I guess final slide and final department.
Final department, we've got planning. So with planning, there's a couple bullet points here. Anticipated code revision plays into the biggest increase in expense. So here we have professional and tech services. That's a 2-component increase. The first is that anticipated code revision, and the second component is a Moab-specific transportation plan to be completed after the regional plan is completed. So both of those things rolled together and increased the fiscal year 2022 professional and tech services line item.
Why is that in planning and not in engineering?
Good question.
That transportation plan should be in engineering.
Great question. We can look at that allocation, make note of that.
I mean, just because Chuck has been interfacing with all transportation planning all things transportation planning.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely look at, these are both general fund line items. So transitioning from one line to another would not be difficult.
Well, except that it would be oversight and staff time.
Right.
So which of these numbers, or how much was allocated for the transportation plan and how much is allocated for the code revision? Or do we know that?
The transportation plan should cost us $15,000
Oh,
for the unified plan. Yeah. That's what our ILA committed to.
thank you, Chuck.
But is this transportation plan that it's up on the screen right now? This isn't the regional plan. This one says Moab specific transportation plan after the regional plan. Am I reading that wrong?
May I clarify that, Tawny? So
Sure.
the regional plan is the UDOT Southeastern Utah plan, the Moab Spanish Valley plan that they're completing, that, we've talked about, over the last few weeks, that the final draft was submitted just in the last few days. Then the Moab specific transportation plan is what we call the unified plan, which will be done with Grand County.
Okay.
That the ILA council signed last meeting or the meeting before, and that we're advertising for currently.
There's too many plans. I'm getting them confused. I apologize.
Well, no, the good news is we did them one after the other. But at one point we were trying to do them at the same time, and I was like, that would really be confusing. So the other one's starting as the other one ends.
Okay, thank you, Chuck.
And this one would be like us finally dealing with the clunkiness of the Mill Creek and 4th East intersection and the 300 South and 4th East intersection, things like that, right?
It's a start. We won't get what are called small area plans out of it, just not enough money, but we'll get concept plans. But if we like what's happening, we can always build upon that.
Because I actually would like to see us identify and put resources toward that particular area, especially since we've been talking about it for a couple of years and Lions Back is closer than it's ever been, and the congestion that we're going to feel at Dave's Corner Market is going to be real, and it's going to be painful.
Yeah, I just got notice last week late that we had applied for another planning grant for that, specifically a Mill Creek small area plan, and we were turned down, and mainly because we have this one outstanding, but we still have the genesis of that program in this plan that we're under advertisement for now. It just won't be as robust. We'll probably have to do 2 stages.
Okay, so back to planning, because I suspect we're going to do engineering at some other time. And then we can talk about this again, if it's going to be moved into your budget, which it sounds like it will be. I just want to comment on the email that I think many of us were witness to today, where being short your staff member, you are all alone in the planning world. I don't think it's reasonable to include Barry as part of planning staff. He's not. He's building department. And it's not reasonable to include Caitlin in your staff because she is special projects regarding housing. And so it's really you and your assistant planner, correct? Is he assistant planner? Is that his title?
Yeah, that's his title. Yes.
And we continue to ask more and more of our planning department, and we continue to staff it at the same level. And I just, I know that we did introduce Laura or that position. Tell me what the title of that position is.
Permit tech.
I thought that was person to answer the phone. I
She
think
does
I thought
that
it was more
too.
than just permit tech.
She does administrative stuff for me and Chuck, and then she answers the phone, and she helps Barry with the permit tech.
So
And she's leaving on her last day will be May 5th.
but the position itself, if we had to give a percentage of the time that that specific position works for and with the planning department specifically, it's probably something like 20, 25%. More, less, what?
Probably, that would probably be about right. Yeah.
Joel, what do you think? You're making the face that maybe you don't agree.
I don't know that she's only working with planning and Barry 25% of the time. I would have thought it was higher than that, but Nora would know more than I would.
No, I'm saying there's planning, then there's building department, then there's engineering.
There's not a building department. It's just planning. There's
No, that's not, they have their own budget, I think.
I
at least
understand.
combined them.
I understand that, but there's not a building department head that their budget falls under planning.
Right.
Like, I understand that they're separate, but technically, the communications director is in my budget, sustainability is in my budget. They're not administrative in their actions, but they are in my budget. They have their own budget line items, but they are in the administrative department.
Okay, so, but what I'm trying to illustrate is that we've taken effort for the past 3 years to ensure that the planning department has the resources they need to be effective and efficient. And so, I mean, I feel like I ask this every year, like, does this budget reflect the growth that we are seeing and the needs that we have to address?
I have to say that the COVID year, things did slow down a little bit. It was still really hard to keep up with everything, just with all the inquiries, and some of that was technical issues, but not really. I mean, things for a while was so uncertain, and now the finances are loosening up a little bit for banks and for lenders and for developers, and so we have an awful lot going on, a lot more going on right now than since I've been here in the last 2 years anyway, by a lot. And Corey's been great, and he will be back. And so it's a temporary situation. So we're at this point, we're just trying to do triage. In order for us to provide a great level of service, it would be great to have another position, but that may come down the line. And I understand that this budget does not include another position. So
I think it's just where we need to reflect on the service that we are set to provide, if this is the level, and knowing that it's expensive. I mean, all of this is so very expensive, but the reason why you're on this list, the planning department is on this list, is because there is interest to provide more support for the department.
Planning is very challenging. It's a lot like police. When I arrived here, we were building the planning department. We've hired Nora and Corey both since I've been here. We had one employee had retired, another had moved over to a different department, and there was essentially no one in planning when I got here. We hired Nora, and we then went out. We did several rounds of interviews trying to get an assistant planner, and we couldn't get anyone to come here for the pay. That's a part of the issue with these positions. I don't know that they're not in line with their field. It's so expensive to live in Moab. It's hard for people to move here for that pay. And so we ended up hiring Corey. He's local and he just finished school and had no experience, with the idea that Nora could mentor him. It's a hard department to staff. It really is.
it is. I've never worked in a planning department that had enough staff.
No.
It's sort of the nature of the beast, but I would say we're very, very thin at this point for everything that we have to do. And if we had another person, that would be awesome. But I understand that our current budget is not recommending that.
Well, I'm grateful to you and to Corey. I think you both do an amazing job of, the work that is in front of you.
Corey's
I
a rock
think
star.
where I find, opportunity to just, dig deeper in this conversation is, based on your presentation at strategic planning. Based on the, when I've been asked a lot about the growth that's happening in Moab, and we need to recognize that the growth is not happening as residential growth. It's tourism and commercial growth. We're seeing more visitors, and that growth isn't increasing with the same, in the same, it's not corresponding with growth of residents in our community.
Right.
And so I understand, like, it's more difficult for staffing on the staffing level, but also it's increasing demands. And then I think about what departments, it's clearly hitting all departments in the face in the same way. I guess we just feel like we've got to get organized and get ahead of it. And that's where planning comes in. And I also think too, that there's, when I see planning commission meetings canceled for lack of agenda items, I get really worried,
Well, that's because there's more than we can possibly do, period. Way more. And so we have to pick and choose what our priorities are. And we also have had some issues with quorum. I don't anticipate there being not enough items for quite some time. We're definitely on a roll at this point. And we were working on a lot of projects. They just hadn't risen to the point where they were ready to go to planning commission. It's not like we're not working on things. It has to go through, an application review process by the DRT, by all of the staff. Then we send comments back, and then they send comments back to us. So we don't take it to planning commission until and unless we've done a whole lot of work on it already. So we were doing that work. These things just hadn't risen to the level of planning commission yet. And now several of them have. So our agendas will be pretty full for a while. Plus I'm processing like 4 code amendments in the next month.
So, and then the other thing is that we've got, just like with that transportation plan that was in your budget, but now we're moving over, where is the budget for the vision process that we've all agreed that we're going to do? And should that not be in this budget? And should that not be part of the allocated effort of this year? And would that not go through planning commission as well?
It would have to go through plan. Well, I don't know. It's not my call. I don't know what's envisioned for the vision process. I really am not. I don't know. I have no idea.
We're in the process of the RFP. That process would depend on kind of what this council wants to do. If they wanted to work directly with the vendor alone, then it would just be a council vendor type setting, and then it would go through planning for adoption and then on to council for the recommendation from planning, or it could be included with planning and council. That's a decision for council.
Where is it budgeted then if it's not in planning?
It's in admin.
Okay. It's 8:04. Sorry if I've dominated this last department and slide. Council, any comments or questions?
It is an RFP instead of an RFQ.
RFQ, I apologize, I misspoke. It's an RFQ.
Right. And is it envisioned as a 2-part, like a visioning process that could roll into a general plan revision? And so the former might go through planning commission, but the latter does.
Yes.
Gotcha.
The visioning
planning commissions are often part of visioning in places. It just depends on what you're looking for. But if we decided to amend the general plan as a part of this, then that has to be managed as well. So that's another task. Just like if we're getting money for the rewrite, the recodification, which is great and we really need, it also takes a fair amount of administration to run that to run a project like that. So yes, hiring consultants is great. It doesn't mean that it's not still additional work for us.
Any other questions or comments at this time? Or how about just general questions or comments from council?
Can I just real quick, Mayor, before we leave this topic, is another position in planning a priority to the point that I should go back into other departments and make cuts and figure out how that works? Like the mayor has spoke to this pretty adamantly and clearly, and I know where the mayor stands, but the rest of the council always remains silent on this, and I can never get a bearing on whether or not this is a priority or not, and whether or not we should be cutting other departments to make this happen.
Well, I agree that it's a priority. It seems like there's a lot of things on the planning list that I see that I don't see advancing, because I hear that like they're just dealing with day-to-day administration and permit application processing. But at the same time, I've heard that other departments have been like really, it's really lean all around. So yeah, I went more for planning, but like I'm also not sure like how much pain it's going to cause elsewhere.
Yeah, that's the challenge, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and we're projecting revenue to be flat, and so we're balancing against a flat revenue. But even if we bumped revenue just a bit to include another planning position, I know, don't shake your head. I know.
That's the world.
It doesn't. Well, don't make me talk to like department heads that are on this call that I love so much and want to support and be like, all right, y'all are gonna fess up 20K per, so we can make this happen.
We can go dig and make it happen if we have to. There's no doubt about that. And we've routinely delivered that. And I would rather make those sacrifices and those cuts and know that we're solid and sound rather than start living off of, and I'm with you, Mayor. I know exactly what you're saying. And based off our revenues and based off our visitation and everything that we're seeing, like it's a safe bet to be able to do that. I agree. It's just such a slippery slope that the next thing, you know, when I got here, we were balancing against 8% increases rather than just $100,000. So
right,
I'm not opposed to it necessarily, but I am opposed to it. And I'd rather live within my means and figure out how to make it work and take that hard cut than start going down that slope again.
I agree. I totally agree. But I do think, you know, if we're going to see a growth in sales tax revenue, we're going to have to plan for that growth.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's not just aesthetics, you know, it's like the idea of like digging deeper into making, you know, identifying areas for higher density and, you know, finishing some of that work, whether it's, you know, density areas of density or the overnight accommodations or, you know, ... I mean, there's just a lot, but you know, those conversations lead to revenue too, because more homes equals more, well, depending on
costs,
has a property tax impact fees.
And most of the new growth is probably not primarily residential. They'll probably be second homes, a lot of them, you know, a condo in Moab. That's what a lot of the new development is.
Mayor, I think Ronnie had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ronnie.
Oh, I mean, I know you guys want to stop, but I guess just like, you know, the chief has helped me understand, like, you know, more people can allow us to expect, you know, doing this and, you know, it seems like we're always struggling with several departments from, you know, being reactive to having the benefit of enough to be proactive. So maybe just at some point, and maybe I can just discuss it with you with my weekly meeting, Joel, but it would help me to understand like what another person could help us accomplish. And, you know, could we get to some of the proactive stuff, or, you know, is the demand so bad that we just need more help on the reactive survival, keeping head above water level?
I want to answer that and give how I see it, and then I'll let Nora probably give you more of the reality. I think hiring another one allows us to move forward into those those action items and start getting some of these changes made. And that to me is the reason why we would want to go forward and bring in a third person, another assistant planner. I see this position, if we're going to fund this position and find it, it's another assistant planner. It's not a permit tech. It's not an admin assistant. It's another planner. And when we rebuilt this department 2 years ago from the ground up, the goal was to have a city planner and 2 assistant city planners. And we struggled so mightily for a year just to fill the 1 assistant planner. I finally went to Nora and said, this position's here and it's funded and it's been here for a year, but we can use the money elsewhere and we just can't fill this position. And we finally moved it elsewhere and started going in a different direction. So I completely agree with everyone that this is needed. And we put forth a mighty effort at one point, and I'm not exaggerating when I say for about a year, we went through, I think, 3 rounds of advertisements and interviews trying to fill this position and just couldn't get it done. So I'm more than happy to try again. And I see it as a position that allows us to start getting our code updates and get that stuff done. Nora, is that how you would see that position as well?
Yeah. I mean, if we continue to increase our day-to-day demands for current planning, we could make a real effort to try to, if we had another person, to try to allocate time so that people would have to work on long-term stuff a certain percent of their time, or one of the people would have to do that and me a certain percent of the time. We'd have to be pretty disciplined about it. And what that would mean is that there's some projects that would probably be delayed. But if it's a priority enough, that's fine. We would just have to make sure that we dedicate those resources to doing more long range stuff.
I guess I'll just lastly say that it just seems to me we have so many challenges. I mean, for example, not knowing how much water we have left, blah, blah, blah. And, climate change and all of this is probably going to change to a certain extent how we have to think about doing things and adjusting. And so I guess, helps me to think if some of that could help us through some of that adjustment and planning for the future a little bit more, because I do think we're all going to have to do things differently.
I agree.
All right, Joel, Ben, any final comments?
I want to thank everyone and thank staff. Danny for helping with the budget. I earlier said it's all Rachel, but Danny's been influential in helping too, and I don't want her to scout me tomorrow. So I want to make sure I get that back in there. Danny and Summer have really helped a lot. Danny and Summer for the first 3 months really did all the heavy lifting, and then we brought Rachel in to help, and Ben's jumped right in. And so that said, staff's really understanding and really good about. We've gone through these budgets with them, met with all the departments several times through this process. They're all aware of what's in there. When we made cuts to make it balance, we went back through it with everyone and made sure they all understood what was being cut and why. There shouldn't be any surprises to anyone. And so as we go forward, as we try and work another position into planning, we'll follow that same process where Danny and Summer and I will meet with departments and we'll shave here and there and start saving pennies to try and make another position.
Joel, did you need to tell us anything tonight about COLA, or will you talk to us about that at the next meeting?
I believe Rachel talked about COLA last time. Ben, do you want to talk about COLA and what it said? I think it's one. Was it one? Danny has it.
Right now it's proposed at 1.8%, which is the same as we received last year.
Thanks.
Which is on standard for the median for everything we were comparing it to.
Correct.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you, Kaylin, and Tawny. I'll take that as a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting has adjourned. Summer, I just want to quickly note that Karen was not in attendance for this meeting.
Thank you.
I didn't do a roll call. Okay, everyone, thank you so much. TLC is the band. Waterfalls is the song. Ben, you are